Okay, so I am gonna, Faith, if we're ready, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Oh,
Everybody see that bear? The bear's coming first?
yes.
Okay. So you are all here to hear about bears, particularly brown bears, grizzly bears, same thing, at the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary and Refuge, where I had the opportunity to visit last August I was out there for almost full 6 days, which is unusual for visiting McNeil, and we'll talk about that later. But I titled my presentation, "The Bears Come First," because that is very definitely the philosophy of McNeil. The bears are the most important things out there. So to start with, I want to kind of orient us as to where we're talking about, where McNeil is, why McNeil, and then I'm going to give you some information. Then we'll get into the bears, into the meat of the stuff. But first, where the heck is McNeil, and how does it fit into the whole system? The map you see here, the colors actually show the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service 16 national wildlife refuges. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game did not have a map that showed all of the state managed refuges. And I listed here, there's 12 refuges, 17 critical habitat areas, 3 sanctuaries, 2 ranges, and just noted that McNeil is both a wildlife refuge and a wildlife sanctuary. So the 3 in blue, the 3 locations noted there, in the farthest west is Walrus Islands. This is also often called Round Island because Round Island is the biggest island, the one that people go to, and it's a walrus refuge. So high on my list of places to visit sometime soon. Then on the farther east, you see the Stan Price National Wildlife Refuge. I'm sorry, it's a Stan Price State Wildlife Sanctuary, and it is often called Pack Creek because it is located on Pack Creek, and it is also a bear sanctuary. And then in the middle, the state on the west side of Cook Inlet is the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary and Refuge. So those 3 blue stars there that we're looking at. The McNeil River State Game Refuge and Sanctuary and Refuge was named for a prospector, Charles McNeil, who worked to that area between 1904 and 1924. It was closed to bear hunting and became a protected area before statehood, so under federal management originally. And then when it was known as the McNeil River Reserve. And then after statehood, state took over management, still maintained it as a protected area. And in 1967, it was established as a sanctuary. So holler, again, interrupt me, holler if you have any questions. So if you want to get to McNeil, you could theoretically get there by boat, but there is no place to like dock a boat. You'd have to anchor it offshore. So really to get there, you have to fly. You fly in a float plane. The map is showing 3 main routes from Anchorage, Kenai, and Homer. The photograph on the left is the plane that my friend Kathy and I chartered out to McNeil. It was flown by Jimmy, who owns Kachemak Air, delightful young man. So if you ever go, I highly recommend Jimmy, very safe pilot. I think Homer is probably the most common way of getting there. You are chartering a plane, so it's the closest place to McNeil. So it's going to be your cheapest charter. It takes about an hour. And the map there is showing that the route goes south of Augustine Island, which is a volcano, an active volcano. We actually went north of the island. We flew right along the flanks of Augustine volcano, which was really interesting to be able to see that kind of up close and personal. Was not being active while we were there, however. So just kind of zooming in. So the last one kind of showed where McNeil is in relation to Cook Inlet. We're going to zoom in a little closer. The map there on the left shows in the northern part of the area, the State Game Refuge. And in the southern part is the State Game Sanctuary, the sanctuary having greater protections than the refuge. There are activities allowed in the sanctuary. And if you look on the Fish and Game website, they outline it better than I can remember at the moment, but you know, there is hunting allowed. It's just not hunting of bears allowed in the sanctuary. And there are other kinds of activities allowed in that area as well. So they're going to be just greater protections in the sanctuary area. And then the drawing on the left, and I stole all of these maps and drawings from the Fish and Game website, just really very informative about this whole area. So the drawing over there is kind of, again, zooming in closer on the McNeil River area. The McNeil River is the main draw, and I'll show you some photos of that shortly. But McFik Creek, which you can see running south with the upper falls and lower falls noted coming out of McFik Lake, is also a big bear area. And we spent a lot of time down in the lower part of McFik Creek while we were looking for bears. I understand that the bears tend to be more in the McFik Creek area in June. I was there at the very beginning of August, the first week of August. So, and then you can see where the campground is noted there, and I'll show you some more there too. So this is on the ground looking at the camp. So the big picture, you can see the camp kind of in the left-hand part of the photo there up against the bluffs. That's Augustine Volcano in the background. And we're looking across the estuary, and then there's the spit, and then going out into open ocean. When we flew in, we landed in the estuary side of that spit. So you have to fly in at high tide to ensure the pilot has enough water to take off again. When we left, he landed on the ocean side of the spit, and we took off on that side. One of the reasons that, and I'm going to talk later about getting out there, but one of the reasons that we were able to stay out there for 6 days when normally your time out there is only 4 days is because the tides were too low on a couple of the days that we were going to be out there for the planes to come and go. So we ended up having to go out a day, had to go out a day early and leave a day late. Just tragic. The other photo there is again from the Fish and Game website, and it is basically just an aerial view of the camp. And I will show you some other pictures of these, but it's not a very big area that the camp is in. You can see there's a cook cabin there on the left-hand side of the photo, some tent sites. And then most of the other buildings are for staff use. There's three Fish and Game technicians out there working at all times, and they each have their own cabin. So I'm thinking there's a cabin you can't see in this photo. And then you can see there's a couple of outhouses in the back there, the paths out to them. So that's the extent of the camp area. And the bears have free reign of everything except the camp area. I'll again talk about that a little bit more. So once you're there, these are your amenities. This is my tent in its little tent platform. So there were, I think, like 8 maybe different places to pitch a tent. So I had the second space down from the cook shack as you went towards the outhouses. This other building you see here was probably the best part of the whole thing out there. We kept hearing about this sauna, and what it really was a bathhouse. It was this adorable little cabin with a pond out in front of it, and that the staff would go out and light up the wood stove towards the end of the day in the afternoon, so that that big giant pot of water, which was collected out of the pond, would be boiling hot when you got in there. And then they'd have another pan that you could mix water from the pond with that hot water and be able to, take a bath of sorts, kind of a spit bath. But it was marvelous. Nice to be able to warm up and nice to be able to get clean while you're camping out there. So why McNeil? Why this little location of all the places in Alaska would we be protecting this spot? And what I'm starting here with is showing you where the grizzly bears are. And you can see that through most of the United States and most of North America, the grizzly bears have been extirpated from their historic reaches. So at the moment, Alaska has 99% of the brown and grizzly bears in the United States and 75% of those in North America. Which is not terribly surprising if you know Alaska. And you can see by the different colors there where the densities are highest and lowest, and that lower south coast of Alaska is where the very high and high densities are. It is not reading my notes here. It is not because McNeil has the biggest brown bears. The record brown bear was taken on Kodiak Island. It weighed over 1,500 pounds. But the ones at McNeil, the males tend to run 800 to 900 pounds and the females 400 to 500 pounds. So they're not making a point of protecting the biggest bears out there. What it's all about is bear density. So we already discussed, already established that Alaska has most of the bears in North America. On the North Slope, that's just talking grizzly bears, you anticipate that there would be about one grizzly bear every 100 square miles. They have big home ranges. On the Katmai coast, which is where McNeil is, so Katmai is another area you can go see bears. Brooks Range or Brooks River is another area. Those are all kind of on the Katmai coast. On average, there's a bear every 7/10 of a square mile. So huge difference between there and the North Slope. But during the peaks of the salmon runs at McNeil, you can have 30 bears per square mile. And around McNeil Falls, which I will show you pictures of, you can have over 100 bears within 1 to 2 miles of the falls where they're all fishing for salmon. So McNeil is all about bear density, but the highest densities of bears anywhere. So that's why it's a protected area. So one of the things that we did when we were out there was, obviously we were watching bears, but we learned a lot about bears too. And a lot just about the area. The fish and game techs that worked out there were amazing, the 3 of them. So I wanted to kind of start by highlighting some of the myths about bears that we tend to commonly believe. One of them is that bears don't have good eyesight. They are a diurnal animal. They are out and about during the day. They have very good eyesight. They can see very well. Another common myth is that the boars, the male bears, want to hunt and kill the cubs in order to breed with the sows, because killing the cubs would bring the sows into estrus. Some of the research I was doing before this was saying this is not true, that the female bears can actually have litters of cubs where all the cubs have different fathers. So if a boar were killing the cubs, it wouldn't necessarily know if it was killing one of his own. However, I will also say that there's an awesome if you like science, there's an awesome podcast out there called Ologies. It's hosted by Allie Ward, and she interviews different ologists. So recently, one of her ologists that she was interviewing was, I think she called her a carnivoreologist, but anyway, the woman's specialty with bears. And that was one of the things that they were talking about was the male bears killing the cubs to bring the females into estrus. So it apparently is not total agreement amongst the bear scientists on whether or not they actually do that. But according to the fish and game technicians out at McNeil, it's not something they see happen often, if ever. Another common myth is that a bear standing up is trying to threaten you, whereas in reality, all they're trying to do is figure out what the heck is going on. You have probably surprised them, and they're standing up to get a better view of you and to get a better view of what's going on. This bear on the left that's standing up in the water there that was his fishing. And he was, according to the one tech out there, was the most bipedal bear they'd ever seen. And I was counting how many steps he would take on his hind legs. And at one point he took 15 in a row, which is like unheard of for a bear, a bipedal bear. But all he was doing was standing so he could get a better view of the fish in the river.
So these are your, Sherry?
These are my photos. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And then, and these are actually also McFik Creek. So that sow and cubs they're also fishing. I don't know if you can tell that that left-hand cub has got a fish in its mouth. You'll see that picture again a little bit better. And then of course, it's not true. They're not out to get you. They're not trying to hunt you down and eat you up. Most of the time when people have problems with bears, it's because they've scared the bears. You've either gotten between a sow and her cubs and mama gets defensive, or you're threatening their food source and they get defensive about that too. Or you've just startled them. And I know I get grouchy when I get scared and startled. So I personally, I mean, everybody's got their bear stories. When I've been out in the woods, I've run across lots of bears, and I have yet to encounter a bear that wasn't more afraid of me than I was of it. And it, you know, that as soon as it realized I was there, it was gone. So just a few myths about bears. One of the things that the text talked a lot about was the difference between habituation and conditioning. And these are words that are often misused, particularly habituation. And you know, you'll hear on the news, especially about bears in Anchorage, that the bears have become habituated to people, and they've become habituated to having, you know, people being for food. But habituation is actually a decrease in responsiveness when they're exposed to a stimulus over and over again. So the bears in McNeil are habituated to people. They don't even pay any attention to you when you're out there. So you can see this bear in this lower photo was less than 20 feet away from us as we were sitting by McNeil Falls watching the bears, and he just wandered on, did his thing. We had another day, a bear just as close, curled up behind us and took a nap. They couldn't care. They are habituated to people and really didn't care that we were there. What they are not is conditioned to seeing people as a source of food, which is what has happened in most towns in Alaska, is that the bears have become conditioned, have learned that people mean food. So, so conditioning is that learning to that people are about something and responding to that that stimulus, responding to food as a stimulus. The picture on the top there is a picture of the cookhouse at McNeil. And we had to do all of our cooking inside that building. All of our food storage, anything smelly that we had to be stored inside there. The bears were not allowed to be in camp. And so they worked really hard to make sure there was nothing that would lure them into camp. And when they did come into camp, they were scared off. The techs would just use, had a little pot, cook pot with a lid and filled with rocks. So they would just go out there and shake that pot at the bears, and it would be enough to scare the bears off and out of camp. And I think the 6 days we were out there, we only saw a bear come into camp once, and it was just wandering through. As soon as the pot of rocks was shook at it, it was gone. So the bears are habituated to not respond to people because they are not conditioned to see people for food, as a food source. Any questions on that? Okay. Some of the ways that the bears are habituated to people is by taking keeping very close control over how people act out there. So there's a limited number of people allowed at McNeil at any one time. There's the 3 fish and game techs that are there all summer and 10 guests. And there can only be 10 people out there at a time. And when we are going out to see the bears, the 10 of us would all have to stay together. I want to say there's actually 9 when I was out there. But so when we would stop, on the left picture here, we're sitting by McFik Creek looking for bears. So when we would stop, we would all stay together in a close group. When we were walking, which we did a lot of, we stayed together, and again, in a close group, single file, trying to look kind of like one big organism rather than 10 individual organisms. And we moved slowly. We were quiet, but we weren't, you know, our Fish and game tech, we were talking, and the fish and game tech would do the, hey bear, ho bear. So we wouldn't startle any bears, but we weren't being extremely loud. We didn't want to change their behavior either. Officially, they say that the distance between camp and McNeil Falls, which is where the primary viewing area is 2 miles. I would say that when we were out there, we pretty much walked 7 or 8 miles every day as we wandered around through the mud and the muck. Occasionally, we had boardwalks like this one to walk on, as did the bears, as you can see from the bear poop. Often we're just walking on muddy paths. We were always, everybody but me and the fish and game techs, everybody else had chest waders. Fish and game techs and I just had hip boots. Because you were always in waders or hip boots, because at some point, either in the morning or the afternoon, you're going to end up crossing the estuary. And there were a few times crossing the estuary that I was pulling up on my boots, making sure they were as high as they would go so the water didn't flow into the tops of them. I was really wishing I'd had waders instead. So it's not, we did a lot of slow walking, a lot of sitting and waiting, but it was long days. We were out, we would leave usually in the morning around 9:30, and it would be 7, 8 o'clock in the evening before we'd get back to camp. So we were out all day looking for bears or watching bears. And the primary location is McNeil Falls. So this is where the bears like to congregate to catch fish. It's fairly shallow water, and the fish, as they're coming, the salmon, as they're coming upstream, all have to come up these falls. So it's easy, fairly easy pickings for the bears. 3 runs of salmon that come into this river and into McFik Creek as well. The first ones, the red salmon come in first in late June, July. When we were there in early August, it was towards the end of the chum run. And then after that, the last run that comes in is the silver salmon or the cohos. So there's something for the bears there all summer. Now, if you can you guys see my cursor if I'm moving my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so this flat area here is a platform where we were sitting. So we would have half a dozen camp chairs up there, and we could sit and overlook the falls and sit and watch the bears. And then just over the bank from that, you'd have to kind of walk down around this way. There's almost like a little cave area where you can also sit and be a little lower and closer to the river to be able to watch the bears. So we would eventually make our way out here by, we were usually out here by 4-ish, I want to say, in the afternoon, and we would spend a couple, 3 hours out here watching the bears. It was windy and it was cold, and inevitably I fell asleep because it was so peaceful. So it was my daily nap out there, but the bears were still amazing. I don't think we ever saw more than about 6 bears at a time while we were there, but there's a photograph in the cook shack where you can count over 30 bears sitting in those same rocks. So as you're sitting there on that platform looking downriver, this is the McNeil River looking down as it flows out to the ocean. You can see Augustine Volcano there peeking up in the background. And of course, a few more bears hanging out. And then this is closer view of the 6 bears that we would see at the falls. And it tended to be the same bears. We got to know the bears. We would cheer them on as they were catching fish. We'd count the number of fish they were catching. And they all had their own unique ways of fishing. And my next bunch of photos is kind of the different bears and the way that they would fish. So this guy, he was lucky, and I caught him as he caught one. So they would catch him in the river, and you can see how shallow that water is. They would catch him in the river, and then invariably they would bring them to shore to eat. And when they would bring him to shore, I think this is the same bear, same fish. When they would bring him in, they were eating every last bit of that fish. They were eating the entire carcass and licking every egg that spurted out of the female's off the rocks. So those seagulls weren't getting much in the way of leavings. Some of the bears like to stand in the fast water. I don't know how he could possibly see anything in there, but he would stand there and then leap after the fish as they were coming upriver. Others would just sit in one spot like this. This guy sat in the water all the time. And what did I say? 800 to 900 pounds, the male bears, or these were all male bears at the falls when we were there. So that's a substantial body weight, but that's a lot of force to be holding your body still in that water. It's pretty amazing. And there was another, and sometimes they just sat on the bank and were patient and waited. You can really see the claws on these guys, how long those are. They were just so cute. And he did this. This was his fishing style. He would just sit there and watch and then take a leap if he saw a salmon come by. Another one that was commonly just watching from the riverbank. This is another guy that liked to just sit in the water and wait for something to come by. Again, holding himself really still in some phenomenal force. No, I don't think I have a picture. And sometimes they just lay down to take a nap. Doesn't he look comfy? Somehow, I think I managed to not get a picture of one of the bears that I wanted to show you. Dusty was one of the bears that was out there, and he was one of the oldest bears. And I'm going to tell you about him because he was just really fascinating. He looked like he had this big snaggle tooth here. And what it was, at some point in time, about 5 years ago, somehow his lower jawbone got broken and was sticking out the side of his face.
Gosh.
And if we have time at the end of this, I'll see if I can find that photo because it was really phenomenal to see. And apparently he had wandered down the coast, I think to Brooks Falls at some point, because one of the techs out there had last year or the year before had seen a posting on Facebook with a picture of Dusty and his broken jaw sticking out. And the comment was that he wasn't going to be long for the world. And the techs were like, yeah, he survived the last 5 years with that broken jaw. He does okay. I will see if I can find a picture of him. I can't believe I forgot to include it. It was fun just to watch the bear behavior and the way they acted. And again, all of this, they were, 50 to 100 feet. If we were sitting on that platform overlooking the falls, or like here, this is McFik Creek, they were no more than 50 to 100 feet away from us at any one time.
How many would they eat in a day?
I think the day that we were counting, that we saw them really doing their best, I want to say one of the bears caught almost 40 fish. So I don't know, in the height of the salmon runs, especially in July when it's the height of the red runs, I don't know how many each bear gets, but a lot. So I keep mentioning McFik Creek. This is lower McFik Falls. We just took a walk up there one day to see if there was anything to see and just to orient ourselves to the area. It was a beautiful hike up there. We didn't see any bears up there in the upper part of McFik. We always saw them down in the lower part. But in June, I'd like to go back in June, and this is where they commonly are. Snorkeling was another common fishing style. This bear again is in McFik, and they basically just would stick their heads underwater and watch for the salmon to go by. Pretty cool. Saw several bears doing this. taking a walk. And just included this one, partly because it's a cool picture and partly just to show how shallow that water is. This is that same sow, that same photo I showed you earlier, the sow and the two cubs. So these guys, these were probably year-old cubs. Very definitely, they were twins, but this one with the fish in his mouth is very definitely the dominant to the other one. So when mom would catch a fish and the babies would come over begging for it, this one always got the fish. And then this other one would end up begging from this one, trying to get, at least get part of it. So it was interesting, even amongst siblings, there was definitely a dominance thing going on. This photo was taken right by camp. So in front of the cookhouse, maybe 30 feet or so, 40 feet, right out at the edge of the bluff overlooking the spit, there's a place you can sit and there's some stumps that you can sit on. And this sow and cubs came wandering up the hillside there beside that spot, maybe 15 feet away from us that evening as she went strolling by. Not a care in the world. I'm sure she knew we were there, but she didn't care. These are some pictures of the foxes that I was showing you the video of earlier. And as I mentioned, they were 5 of them originally in that litter. When we got out there were only 3 left. They were about 4 months old. And they were, I think their den was right near one of the staff cabins. So it was right in camp is where their den was. The other things that were near there that I didn't include pictures as I didn't get any good ones, but we walked down the beach one day opposite of the direction where we go to look for bears, and there was a cormorant colony. So we went down and spent some time watching the cormorants down there, which was pretty cool. Okay, who wants to go? Because it really is a very cool place to go. So for starters, it's a limited number of people. I mentioned there can only be 10 people out there at a time. It is a lottery permit system, and the deadline for lottery permits is coming up very soon, March 1st. Let me find my notes on this so I don't forget to tell you something. There are 185 permits given each year with it weighted, and I can't remember where I saw this number. They weight the permits to residents, and I want to say it's like something like 70 to 80% of the permits go to Alaska residents. So everybody pays a $30 application fee, and you get to choose what 4-day block during the summer that you would like to go. And this year, 2022, it will open June 3rd is when the first block of time is, and it ends August 26th. They have that whole time frame divided into 4-day blocks. And you get to pick your top 3 choices. So $30 fee to apply for a lottery permit. If you get the permit, residents pay $225 and non-residents $525. And that fee just basically gives you permission to go out to McNeil. Like I said, 10 people at a time. If you apply, if you have like a group, so like my friend Kathy and I applied together to go out there. So we both got permits for the same block. So if you apply together, you get to go together if you get a permit. They also have standby permits, which allow you to go out to the camp, but you can only go out with the Fish and Game techs on one of the guided trips if somebody else chooses not to go that day. So like when we were out there, Kathy ended up not going out on the hikes 2 or 3 days. She twisted her ankle really badly the first day and wasn't able to go for the next couple of 3 days. So if there had been a standby person out there, they could have gone in her place. Once you've applied, basically cross your fingers and hope you get the permit. And I want to say it's late March, they announce who the permit winners are, and you have to pay your $225 or $525 to maintain your spot out there. And then you have to do all the arrangements for getting out there. So you're arranging for a charter flight. There's 3 or 4 different companies that fly out there. Like I mentioned, I went with Jimmy at Ketchimek Air, and I think it cost Kathy and I about $800 a piece for that charter flight out and back. They do come and get you and bring you back home. You need to make sure, and it was one of the things that one of the Fish and Game techs out there has been working out there every summer for 20 years. And he said, he always wants to encourage people to come out. And he said, if we ever did a talk like this, to make sure that people are aware of what's really involved with getting around once you're out there. And I mentioned that we walked 7 to 8 miles a day, often on muddy, uneven terrain. We, back through the estuary at the end of the day, which is deep water. So not to discourage you from going, but just to be aware that it's not as simple as, a 2-mile walk, the way the Fish and Game website makes it sound. And they also have a series of really good videos on the website that are well worth watching, that give you a really good view of what it's like to be out there. You have to bring everything that you need to stay out there for 4+ days. Like I said, we were out there for 6. So bringing your own tent, your sleeping bag, whatever you need for that. You need to bring all your food. They do have propane stoves, like 2-burner stoves, and cookware, so you don't have to bring cookware. And we brought our own camp chairs, and we didn't end up needing those. They had plenty of camp chairs for people to use out there. So they had camp chairs kind of stationed out at McNeil Falls. And then we all had those Crazy Creek chairs that you kind of sit on the ground, but they give you a little back support that we would use. We could each carry one with us, and we'd use those when we were at McFik Creek or any place where we were sitting on the ground. And then be prepared to be spending 8 to 10 hours a day away from camp. So you're just carrying a day pack. You want your rain gear, your hip boots, your waders, and lunch, water, camera. Any questions? Anybody have any questions about the whole getting there, how this whole part of it?
Can you show the slide that had the website? I think you skipped that, or I saw it.
I didn't skip it. I went too quick to it.
There.
Yeah. So yeah, probably actually the easiest way to find that web page is just to Google McNeil River permit or something, and it'll take you to the Fish and Game website. It's kind of a long address to follow otherwise, and that same web page or set of web pages has information on Round Island, the Walrus Refuge, and also Stan Price, where the other bear sanctuary. And information on visiting those as well. And they have information on all of their, those other, like the 17, all the other state managed wildlife protected areas. There's information there on all of those as well. And these 2 books are hugely good resources about McNeil and its history and what's going on out there. You'll see that Larry Miller's name is on both of them. And he was the first Fish and Game manager of the sanctuary, and he spent every summer out there for 30 years till he retired. So he's like the authority on McNeil, and was the one that established the way McNeil is run as a sanctuary and the visitation that's allowed out there. So I used an interlibrary loan and was able to get both of these through the Valdez Library. Yeah, but really interesting books and tons of good pictures, way better than mine. And I had one just pretty scenic picture. This is from my tent site at sunset one day. It was an absolutely glorious place. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention, I'm going to go back to here so you can, if you get a permit to go to McNeil, you cannot get one the following year. So you're only allowed to go every other year, or even allowed to apply every other year. So I got to go in 2020 or 2021. What year are we in? So I can't apply for a permit out there this year, but I will definitely be applying for one next year in 2023. And hopefully going in June. And the Fish and Game website does, go back to that, does talk about what the bears are doing during the different months. So June, you're more likely to see like breeding behavior and more bears in McFik Creek. July is when you're going to have those huge concentrations at the McNeil River Falls. And then August, when I was out there, there's starting to be fewer of them. But it's still always just fascinating and interesting behaviors to watch, and especially to see them day after day. And I'm done. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
I'm just picturing seeing these great big animals and getting into your tent and zipping up into your sleeping bag there with this cloth around you, fabric, and knowing that there are these great big bears all over the place. Did people talk about that? Did anybody sleep in the cook shack?
No, and that actually is not allowed. Trying to find a picture of my tent there. That's actually not allowed. We were all given an air horn, so that we had to have in the tents with us, and with the instructions that if you saw a bear, heard a bear, anything, you had to blow the air horn to alert everybody else that there was a bear in camp. But like I said earlier, I said that we only ever saw one bear wander through the camp, because the techs do a really good job of maintaining that as a bear-free area, of always scaring the bears away that wander into the camp area itself. So they have been conditioned, I guess, to avoid that area because they get scared off when they do come into it. I manage to sleep well every night, which is unusual for me. So it was interesting. I think I felt like I gained a whole new respect for bears and a whole lot less fear. I'm always going to be respectful of them, but I don't feel like I'm as afraid of them anymore, because I know that they're not really wanting to do me any harm. Not, I mean, there's always going to be those rogue bears. There's always going to be that scary story, but yeah, it was interesting.
It's just really interesting and amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. An opportunity to go out there. Yeah.
So when you are watching bears during the day, did the techs give you information like on their lifespan, on like
we got information about everything. Yeah, the techs are all really, they're all really knowledgeable about the ecosystem as a whole. So yeah, we would get information about the bears. We, that in the early spring, they were eating primarily sedges, which are like 40% protein. And, and then as moving into the fish, as the fish come into the rivers, we would learn about what plants we were seeing out there, just about the ecosystem as a whole, some about the geology. It was a really interesting conglomerate rock formations out there. So yeah, it was very definitely an educational experience, but not overwhelmingly so. It wasn't too much. You didn't feel like you were being lectured at all the time. You just got good information about what you were seeing.
So Sherry, I have a question. What prompted you to go to McNeil when you did? What prompted you to go, period?
I happened to be on vacation with my friend Kathy in Arizona that spring, that January, and she was just sitting down to put in her application because she'd known of it before, and she's like, "Would you want to go?" And I'm like, "Sure." So we put in for our 3 choices of whatever our time block choices were, and we managed to get one. So yeah, it was I actually think it might have been her first time applying too. So our first times applying for a lottery system, and we actually got the permit. So we'll see if we're so lucky next year. I think we'd both like to go in June next year. So
Sherry, could you put up the slide again of the flight path where you fly out of?
are you thinking about this one?
Yeah.
So that's Beluga Lake in Homer. That's our pile of gear waiting to be loaded in the plane. So yeah, there was a float plane out of Beluga Lake in Homer. which is right in Homer. And I don't know, did you have something specific there, Michelle, or?
No, I was just looking at the different options of where you could fly out of.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Homer, like I said, it's going to be by far the cheapest because it's going to be the shortest flight. And I cannot remember, there's another flight company out of Homer, charter company, that has a bigger plane. And I want to say it takes like 6 people. This one would have taken 3. And with them, you kind of more just like buying a seat fare. Costs about the same. The price isn't any different, but anyway, so there are some different options, and those charter flight businesses are all listed on the Fish and Game website too. Huge amount of information on the Fish and Game website. So if you're interested in this, I spend some time on there, but hurry because you only have 6 days to get your permit application in.
Right on. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Anything else? Any other pictures you'd like to see again or anything before we sign off of here?
Any chance you can find the picture of the snaggletooth?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a minute so I can figure out where to look for that. You do end up having to, you pay for your cargo. So however much stuff you take out with you, you're paying by the pound to take it out there. And one of the techs he kept saying, what an awesome opportunity this was and how it was available to anybody because it was so inexpensive. As all you have to have is a tent and a sleeping bag to be out there. And it's like, no. I mean, even if you're an Alaskan, you just spend $255 on the permit fee. You spend at least $800 on a charter flight out there. You have to own all that camping gear. I mean, it's like, it was not cheap. It was not hideously expensive. And, it's certainly less expensive than like going to Brooks Falls and staying in the lodge for, $2,000 for the same kind of time frame. But yeah, it was awesome. Totally worth it. Totally intend to do it again if I can. So.
Does the website suggest what gear to bring with you, or is that something that you would share if someone was chosen?
I would be happy to share that, but yes, it also does. I'm going to see if I can just pull it up real quick and show you what all's there. All right, I am going to try and if I can get back to Zoom here, I will screen share again real quick. Okay, so this is the Fish and Game webpage for McNeil River. So this is the overview, kind of just has some of the history of the site. I'm not going to read, you can see where I stole some maps from. Talks about the animals that are out there, but here, once you get into the visitor information, then there's multiple pages on how to get there. And that's that map. What to bring. These videos are the ones that I was saying were so useful as far as understanding what you're getting into out there. There's the what to bring. Yeah, they actually checked our IDs and our permits. We had to have the permits printed and an ID with us. And then they talk about, everything that you need to take out there with you. Information about the permits and how to apply for a permit. And we have multiple links here to go for. But yeah, really informative website. And then here's the links to those other sanctuaries, Stan Price, the other bear sanctuary, and Walrus Islands, the Walrus Sanctuary. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sherry, would you say that this trip informed your artwork at all or inspired you to do any of your crafting and arts?
You'd think it should. I should paint a bear, but I haven't yet.
Well, I will look forward to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I always think that I should be doing something that's more directly associated, art-wise with my travels, but it doesn't ever seem to actually work out that way. So
No
I
judgment.
just enjoy. No, thank you. I just enjoy the experiences. I saw a description here recently that somebody described themselves as an experience junkie. I said, that is so totally me. I am an experience junkie.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I have to leave, but this
Oh,
was
thanks,
really
Michelle.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. Nice to not talk
Yes.
to the ether.
Thank you for posting it on Facebook, and thank you for this wonderful presentation.
You're very welcome. And now that I've actually taken the time months later to go through all of my bear photos and pick up the best ones, I will share those on Instagram and Facebook too, just so you can see them a little better.
Excellent. And
And hopefully Faith will have this recording available at some point in time so we want to share it any further. I'd be delighted for other people to see it.
yes, thank you, Faith, for organizing and emceeing this.